Welcome to Here's the Deal. I'm Laura Barnes with Leadership Beyond Sport. Today we're going to be talking to a colleague and associate of mine who is phenomenal. Her name is Brenda Jacobson. She is the founder of UEQ Global, which is an organization that trains individuals and groups to use emotional intelligence as a way of enhancing both their personal and professional lives. So without further ado, Miss Brenda Jacobson. Hi, Brenda.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be with.
Awesome. So I gave a quick intro about your company, but tell us a little bit more about UEQ and what you are doing for individuals and organizations in the space of emotional intelligence.
It's such an upcoming, it's always been important, but it's really become important now with the amount of mental health issues that are showing up after this last couple of years that we had. So we just work with people to primarily around conversations, whether that is conversations with themselves, how they treat themselves, how they talk, that inner voice, or building relationships outside of themselves, whether that's with, a spouse, with their children, in a sales type role within corporations, with teams. Conversations are so critical. And nobody's ever trained us how to manage our emotions and be accountable for them. And then they will sabotage. They generally sabotage relationships in one form or another.
Yes, I have been on both the giving and receiving end of that sabotage. I think we
all
have.
have.
So today we're going to talk about something that I did a 6-week course with you. So we were digging a little bit deeper into that communications. That's actually how you and I met initially. And in that 6-week course, one of the things that really stuck out to me that we're going to talk about today was the concept of corrective complex. And I know that is probably a foreign phrase to a lot of people. So can you tell us a little bit about what corrective complex is?
And it is kind of a phrase that we coined within our organization. So most people probably haven't heard of it. But what it is, and we all do it, is that knee-jerk reaction that we have to try to fix, heal, convert, teach, or direct other people when it's unsolicited. So it's giving unsolicited advice, thinking that you know better than the other person on what's best for them, how they can fix their life, that type of thing. And it shows up. The studies show that it shows up about 90% of the energy put into conversations is dedicated to that. And
wow,
it shows up for everybody every time. And we find that the more you care about a person, the more apt you are to fall into that conversation trap.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned this a little bit. The more you care about somebody, the more likely you are to fall into it. What are some other reasons that an individual might use this as sort of their default mechanism, or that they might use it more often in a conversation?
I would say, so let me preface that with, it generally is a very heart-centered strategy. It comes from a place of caring, whether it's somebody you deeply care about, or a team member, or some stranger that you run into on the street that's struggling with something. It usually comes from the heart and from that place of caring. Other times I've seen it show up is with control freaks, people who need to control a situation, need to direct the outcome of something. Now, the key here, I really want to emphasize this, the key is when it's unsolicited. So it doesn't mean that it's always wrong to give advice or try to help a person. It's in that unsolicited manner.
Absolutely. And what are some examples of phrases or things that we might say that can be sort of our aha moment of, oh, I'm using corrective complex right now?
Anytime you use the word should, that's a really key thing. If you're, I don't know about phrases, but if you find yourself giving people advice, can I give an example of where this showed up in my life?
Absolutely.
The most profound one, and it shows up, I'm not unusual. It probably shows up in 90% of my conversations, no matter who I'm talking to. But this one was so profound for me because I have an adult son, and I was out visiting him. He lives on the other side of Canada. And he was cooking me dinner, and he was just telling me like, oh man, I'm so tired. Didn't sleep at all last night. And I said, oh, does that happen often? And he said, yeah, I'm just so stressed with work and with the boys. And here it comes. This was me. I automatically went into a place of, well, you know what? I've got a friend who's a heart math facilitator, and I'm sure he would just do a call with you and give you some strategies for managing your stress. Again, very heart-centered, very much about how can I improve his life. And he stopped cooking. He turned around and looked at me and said, why is it that every time you come out here, you try to fix me? And I was like, I couldn't even speak. Like, I was dumbfounded that was how he took that, because, and I had to give myself a timeout. I went to my room. I thought, well, because this was before I knew anything about this. This was before any of this training. And I went up and I said, we got to revisit this, like do a do-over here, because I couldn't be trying to fix you, because I don't see you as broken. I see you as playing a really big game and needing some tools that I might have access to. So again, it comes from a really good place, but he was very offended by that. And I was very hurt that I had offended him. And the whole conversation broke down. Now, we mended it, but very often people won't respond like that. They will just go, oh, she's such a jerk, and walk off. And it sabotages those relationships. So yeah, that's just an example, but you can kind of take that and do a copy paste to almost every relationship that you have. Yeah. So salespeople are some of the worst offenders, along with mothers of adult children. They're the worst. That's me. Always trying to fix things for my kids.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it comes from a place of love. And I actually had a very similar experience with a significant other. And it was, he was cooking me dinner, which was a very kind, ironically enough, cooking me dinner, very kind, generous action, and was doing it in a way that I would not have done it myself. There was nothing wrong with how he was doing it. I just asked the question, oh, is that how you're going to do that? Which maybe wasn't corrective complex, but had the same reaction of, why are you always trying to fix me? So, but yeah, I think that it's good to be aware. And I hadn't had this training and hadn't met you at that point. So, but definitely hard pause for a second where I actually broke down. I started crying and I was like, oh, wow. Like because it hit me in a different way, obviously, because of my, past and background and everything. And I was like, oh, awesome. I'm going to that place right now. So it's definitely impactful.
We say when you go into corrective complex, you have a complex, you give the other person a complex, and you make the whole situation more complex than it needs to be. And that came out in both of our examples.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about when we were going through the course, there was something that was said that was really profound to me. And I know this ties into some other work that you do with UEQ and communication and conversation, but what is the impact? I mean, you kind of gave an example with your son, but when we go into corrective complex, how is that received by the other person? How does that kind of manifest in them? What might it bring up in them?
I mean, it can show up in a number of different ways, but ultimately it will diminish. It diminishes people. It takes their power away. Right. It tells them that you don't think they're capable of fixing their own life or healing their own woes, or, learning what they need to learn, developing the tools. And it comes from a place, unconsciously, of thinking that we are better than the other person, that we have. And often we do. But what we have to acknowledge in our conversations is that even though we might have, with my kids, I've got 30 years more experience in life than they do. I've made every mistake out there. I've worked with numerous people that I've coached and brought through things. But I didn't acknowledge that they're the expert on themselves. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that know exactly how a situation is affecting them, what they need to emerge from that situation. And if they don't, then they know that I'm here. They know that they can come and ask for help. Right. Then I can give it, and it's not. Then that's solicited.
Yeah, I think that's a great example or a great point. And I love that you said that it diminishes. So I think the example that was given, and maybe in a slightly different context during the workshop, was, when you use corrective complex on someone and you take away their power
Yeah.
to solve the problem on their own, you almost put them into a state of victimhood, even if that's not really where
Yeah.
they're at or what they're feeling. They might just be frustrated. I know that I'm a verbal processor. I'm an external processor. So when I
Yeah.
get really frustrated with something, I process externally. And I would say 80% of the time, I actually don't need input. I'm
No.
just talking it out to solve the problem. And then, by the time the conversation's over, or by the time I've said what I need to say, I'm halfway to a solution. So that victim piece, I think, is really
It's
huge.
really good. The and so one of the we like I say we do a 6-week course. That's just our introductory course around developing the conversation skills, and there's numerous tools that help us avoid falling into corrective complex or emerge somewhat gracefully from it when we have been in there. But one of the key things that we teach is simply getting permission.
Mhm.
So when I say getting permission, we talk about implicit and explicit. So it could be if you are already a teacher, a student shows up in your room, it's implied that you have permission to teach them. If you're a doctor, you have permission. If you're a coach, you have permission. So these aren't saying that every time you give advice it's wrong. It's when it's unsolicited. And if you don't have implied permission, then we teach people to just take a pause and ask permission before you jump in there. So in my case, if I had just said to my son, as he told me how stressed out he was, if I just said, "Hey, I've got a suggestion. Can I share it with you?" My guess is he probably would have said, "No, thanks." Just knowing the relationship. And I would have to be okay with that, but at least it wouldn't have made him feel like I think that he's broken somehow. It wouldn't have upset me. The whole thing wouldn't have fallen apart. The conversation just would have carried on, and I would have had to swallow my very useful advice and let him and know that I can come down the road and go, "I was going to tell you that. I
Right.
told you so."
Yeah,
I
and I
couldn't
think
do
that's,
that.
when we talk about the implied permission, the implicit permission, and you mentioned coaches
Yeah.
and teachers. And so people who are kind of naturally in that teaching, coaching, mentoring, guiding
Yeah.
space, I think it's also really important to note that, like, I'm a coach, but my friends aren't my clients. My
No,
family are not
exactly.
my clients. So just because
Right.
you are that person and you have that title when you're at work doesn't mean that it's implied permission across the board with every single person you come into contact with.
Yeah.
So that's something that stood out to me as well when we were going through the training.
That is so bang on, because it is very situational.
Mhm.
So I've got friends who went through coaching and became certified coaches. Every conversation I had with them turned into a coaching session. And I would go like, "I'm not looking for coaching." And
Mhm.
I didn't know what I know now. And this is why the training is so powerful because we do these things unconsciously. This is why I call them conversation traps. There's a few more that we go into, but they really are. You're going along with a good conversation, and all of a sudden it just goes off the rails, and you don't really know why.
Mhm.
You've fallen into a trap, and so the key is to avoid the traps or to figure out how to get yourself out of them.
Yeah, definitely. And even when we were in that 6-week course, I had a friend who was going through some stuff. And this friend and I, we tend to just sort of naturally give each other advice and guidance sort of whenever we would converse. And I think it was the same evening or maybe the next day after one of our group sessions, she said something and I responded with, "That's an interesting perspective," as opposed to going into coaching or saying
Yes,
something. And I was like, "Oh, there's so many things I want to say."
I know.
And her reaction was she was a little miffed because I think she was expecting that coaching.
Yeah,
And so I actually told her, I said, "Well, I'm going through this training right now, and I'm aware of the fact that I sometimes default to giving advice, even if it's not wanted or needed. I'm here if you would like advice or suggestions, but if not, I don't want to force them on you." And she said, no, I'd love your advice in this particular situation. And so it all worked out. But especially in that dynamic with somebody who I know I always give advice to, and she gives me lots of advice as well. It goes both ways. But catching myself, and it was actually a really uncomfortable and almost vulnerable place for me to not go into that. So can you talk a little bit about that when somebody starts catching themselves before they go into corrective complex? And I mean, like I said, I felt like I was just chomping at the bit to say so many things. And I was like, I just have to sit here and twiddle my thumbs. So how do you help people navigate that, or in their own heads, physically? Like what is that process when people are just really struggling with breaking the habit of corrective complex?
Well, and the asking permission, like that's a really simple way to say, hey, would you like some advice on that? Or that happened to me. Can I tell you how I got out of it? Or like, there's always, it's not that you have to hold it back and not help that person, but it's that just asking permission is the first step to it.
Yeah.
And they might say no, and you just have to be okay with that. I had my daughter came over one day. She was planning her wedding. She was postpartum, like had all those pregnancy hormones floating around her system. She was highly emotional. Her mother-in-law was driving her crazy. And she came over and just had to dump all of this emotional stuff out on me. And she ranted on, and like to a point where she was going, I can't be part of this family. I'm calling off the wedding. And I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, this is so, I know the mother-in-law, she's lovely. And, but I had the smart. So this is after the training. I was going to jump in with, Stevie, she's a really nice person. And I thought, no, bite my tongue. All I said is, would you like some advice? And she said, no, I don't. She goes, I know I'm being unreasonable. I know it's the hormones. I just need to get this out. And I said, okay, what can I do for you then? And she said, just listen to me.
Yep.
And that's all I could do. And I had to accept that, I offered. But another time with the same daughter, I was practicing my asking permission. I was aware of corrective complex, and I'd say, oh, can I give you some advice? And she goes, that's why I'm here. Like, just know that when I come to you and tell you something, I need your advice. So that's the default. If I don't want your advice, I'll tell you. So there is those times when you only have to establish it once with people like that. Because after that, she comes to me, I give her advice, she takes it. There's no breakdown in the relationship.
Yeah.
If I had that same conversation with my other kids, they'd probably go, no, thanks. Like, my older daughter said to me once, like, don't do that, because you were allowed to learn all of your lessons the hard way. You got to allow us to learn ours. And I went, yeah, that's a really good point, but I still have to bite my tongue.
It is a good point. I joke all the time that I have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks. So, and I'm actually still working on it. It's still in process. I'm sure I have a few lessons left to learn, but I love that. And I think that it's, the asking, would you like advice? Sometimes when I can tell that somebody's having a really rough time, I do a similar thing where I say, are you looking for advice, or do you just need to vent?
Exactly.
And I think that's fantastic. I love that you guys incorporate that, because I've actually never heard anybody else talk about it outside of the emotional intelligence community. And I've been saying it for years. But I think it's just huge, because it's the exact opposite of corrective complex, right? Like, it puts them back in the power seat of saying, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
And giving them the opportunity to, in my experience, it also gives people, they have to sort of take a break and pause from whatever emotion they're in.
Yeah.
And go, oh, what do I need right now? And then once they know and they can articulate it, then they can move forward. But sometimes that can disrupt the pattern of chaos, anxiety, whatever frustration they're going through.
Absolutely. Because they have to sit back and think how to answer your question. Like, do I want advice or not?
Right.
And so it's very powerful. A lot of what we teach in the 6-week and then the follow-up, 12 weeks going deeper into this stuff, they're very simple strategies. Like, they're no-brainers, but nobody's ever taught us about it. Nobody's ever thought about it. They just go around on this default mode and, creating problems and hard feelings in their wake, and they don't even know that they're doing it.
Yeah.
We see this a lot with salespeople. Like I said before, is they'll go in and tell their clients, oh, you really need this and you should do this and you should do this and our product is the best. And instead of just going and finding out what they think and
Right.
asking them, hey, can I make a suggestion? What happens when you give unsolicited advice or suggestions, people just put you on ignore, or they go, well, screw you, I'm going to go do the exact opposite of what you told me,
Yep.
because you have just told me that I don't have the ability to take care of myself. So I'll show you. On the other hand, when you ask if you can make a suggestion or give some advice, if you get a yes, which I'd say most of the time you do, because people are so stunned that you actually asked them that they're going to go, well, yeah, well, of course. But they actually listen. When you take the time to ask, you've put, like you said, you've created a pause in that conversation. And you put them on alert that, hey, I'm going to say something that's of value to you. You might want to hear this. And they listen. And not only do they listen, but they hear. They hear, and they more often than not will follow your advice, because you've shown that you've just energetically, you've kind of set that, you've adjusted the power dynamics within that relationship from you knowing everything and them knowing nothing to, hey, we're on level playing field now. When people feel empowered like that, they are actually open to following suggestions or advice.
Yeah.
So it's very empowering. We worked with, when we were just going through our beta test with the courses and the work, the coaching and the courses, we worked with a technology company here, and their goal was to close more sales. And we just worked with them basically on corrective complex and how all the different strategies for getting around that.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked with them for a month. And in the next month, they closed more sales in that 1 month than they had in any of the 20 years that they'd been in business, any of the whole years, like 12-month periods.
Wow.
And they closed significantly more. But what was really funny with that is that the founders were husband and wife, and they were going through a divorce, trying to figure out how to split up the company. But through developing these skills on the business level, their marriage mended, and they didn't have to go through a divorce after that, because they started communicating personally much better.
Yeah.
And because these are life skills. Like, we don't say, we go into corporations, but we don't develop business skills.
Mm-hmm.
We develop life skills. So when you learn this in one arena of your life, corporate workshops we did, but then you take it home and all of a sudden you're talking to your kids different and your wife different and your friends differently. And all of a sudden the changes, are global, not just specific to one environment within your life.
Absolutely. And I would say, there's even an element of, it's not just that this is for everyone, meaning corporate and personal, but everyone, meaning men and women. Everyone can benefit from this. I think it's really easy for people to think, men lack emotional intelligence and women are so superior in it. And we're not. Like I said, I use corrective complex probably daily.
Yeah.
So just
Like I
that
said,
awareness that we all have room to grow, especially in this space.
it was funny because I've got what is he now? 14-year-old grandson, and he hates school, like hates school. He's extremely intelligent. And I said to him, if you had to set up the education system the way you think it should run, what would you do? And we had this discussion, and I said, do you know what I would teach is emotional intelligence, is how to have these conversations, how to build relationships. And he said, oh, you don't have to teach that. People just know that. And I went, like, have you looked at social media lately? Nobody knows this. Like, have you looked at the conflict in the world? This is not, but that's the mistake, is that everybody thinks that we just come in naturally able to manage our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't bother bringing it into any of our education system, any of the, primary school, secondary school, university, colleges. Nobody ever has a course on, hey, here's how you build relationships, or here's how you manage your stress, anxiety, and overwhelm.
Yeah. And I mean, even I know you guys work also with athletics and sports teams. So, team dynamics and team cohesion. And there's so many
Absolutely.
whatever group or environment you're in. I mean, we're social creatures. We're not meant to live in isolation, which
No,
means that you have to interact with people. And so those interactions can be really positive or really negative, depending on the two people who are engaging in them and what they're educated to know what to do and know how to do it, essentially.
absolutely. And this is, in our deeper training, on our extensive training, everything is kind of built on this foundation of conversation skills.
Mm-hmm.
But we go into power dynamics and how to manage power dynamics and when you look at the situation, even in country and the leaders of countries and all of the breakdown in there and the conflict around there. Honestly, I think if those leaders had a higher level of emotional intelligence, I don't think we'd have global conflict. I think human beings are innately intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the skills to manage our way, that resilience, that agility, the ability to get through those situations of conflict. It's just that nobody has really, so we have all the tools. Nobody's taught us how to use the tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they're innate. The other thing, as you experienced in the thing, is that we actually we talk about the skills, we give the information, the language, the skills, but we turn them into a habit through card games.
Mm-hmm.
So we have what we call neurogamification. They've got brain training right in those games. But that's how you take these skills of asking permission and open questions and all these different things that we teach, and you actually make them a habit.
Right.
You train your brain just by having fun, not even knowing that you're training your brain. But it's fast. We say fast, fun, and a really highly effective.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I engaged in the course because I was curious. I was like, well, I feel like I'm a pretty emotionally intelligent human being. I do this stuff for a living. I work with a lot of people. Let me know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And there was a ton that I learned in that process, even in just the corrective complex alone, where I was like, oh,
yeah. Wow.
Okay. But you touched on something else really important, I think, that I'd love for you to elaborate on. And this goes a little bit broader than corrective complex, but we were talking earlier about asking for if you can give advice and when people start tuning in and actually listening, when they give you permission. So listening is such a huge component of the receiving side of emotional intelligence, I think. But can you talk a little bit about listening skills as part of just the umbrella of emotional intelligence?
It's when we talk about emotional intelligence, emotionally intelligent communication, listening is more important than talking. When you can listen, like truly listen, we say that you listen with your ears, but you hear with your heart, or you hear with your heart, listen with your ears. But it's, you really have to have that listening ability before you can respond appropriately. So for example, when you ask permission, you have to actually listen to what they say coming back, and a lot of people will ask permission and then just bulldoze ahead and give it anyways, regardless of what the other person says. Yeah, but you really need this. Can I give you advice? No. Well, you really need it. So here it is. Like this. You've had this. I'm sure you've had it happen. It
Yeah,
happens
absolutely.
all the time.
Or they sneak it in later in the conversation, and you're
Yeah.
like, I like, no means no. Consent is consent. No means no.
No, yeah. But we do in our more advanced training, and you came across some of this in the 6 week, as we start building those, training the brain again, because it's mostly done through card games, for empathy, for, what do you see here, understand and care about that person. And you can't come to those things if you haven't listened to what they're saying, to what their challenges are. But listening effectively, we talk about, one of the exercises that we have in there is reflection. So listening to somebody and then being able to reflect back to them what I heard, what I heard you say was,
Yep.
and not just parroting, the word for word, but really taking it in, digesting it, and coming out with your own perspective on what the challenge was that they brought up. So what I heard you saying was blah, blah, blah. And some people say, no, that's not what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go, oh, so what did you mean? Or where was I off base on this? But you can have those conversations so that when you're in a relationship, you're really clear on what's going on with that other person, whether it's sales, whether it's a coaching client, whether it's your child or your spouse or your best friend that's having challenges. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. But if you develop the ability to listen well enough to actually reflect back to them what you heard them say, that's effective listening. And it's a skill that we have to develop.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you touched on that, because active listening and the reflective techniques they're taught. I think those are actually taught. I experienced it at the college level when I was doing my undergrad. So I know that in public speaking, you sometimes get that. In different courses, you might learn more about listening techniques. But I think it is so critical to be able to, it's listening comprehension. It's not just listening for the sake of listening. It's listening to understand. And exactly. I've always loved that statement. Are you listening to understand, or are you listening to respond?
Right.
Those are two completely different concepts when it comes to listening to what somebody else is saying.
Yeah. And that's what we teach is before you speak, ask another open question. Like curiosity. Curiosity is king as far as I'm concerned. The more questions you can ask, the better aligned you'll be with that person.
Mm-hmm.
The more understanding you'll have of where they're coming from and what challenges they truly face. Because most people aren't, on the first time they tell you what they're dealing with, it's going to be very superficial.
Yeah.
And it's through digging, just deeper conversation, not bombarding them with questions, but just that curiosity. So what does that mean to you? And where does that show up for you? And like, just really, digging deeper into that. And they'll eventually along that cycle, they'll get more and more comfortable with you. And then eventually you get to the real meat of the problem. Yeah. When we're playing the card games, there's a lot of psychological safety in just playing the card games. We're helping people develop their emotional vocabulary, which is key to emotional agility, emotional resilience, emotional intelligence. But what we find is the first couple of rounds, people will be quite superficial with their responses. And then it takes one brave soul to go deeper and get real with their response. And then everybody seems to follow them down there. They're going, oh, it's okay to go there.
Yeah.
And we learn so much about people. Not only that, but people come out and say, I never knew that was in me. Like I was as surprised as you with what with my answer or my comment.
Yeah.
I didn't know I felt that way. Like and I mean, that's so many of us, how many times have you been in a situation and gone, I just don't have the word. I'm feeling something, but I don't have the word. I just can't explain it. And it's because we do not have a robust emotional vocabulary. We do not have the words to really identify what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
For example, angry, frustrated, irritated. Those are different things.
Mm-hmm.
But they're kind of all lumped in together, and people will just say angry when they're not really angry. They're more irritated or frustrated with a situation, but it's not a common word for them to use. So they'll go to a default.
Yeah.
So,
and I love that resource, actually, the emotional vocabulary resource. I still look at it and find words every once in a while. They're like, I don't know that I could ever use that one in a sentence, but I like it. It's interesting.
Well, and this is the thing is, and it's a free giveaway. I don't know where on one of the pages on our sites, but I can give you the link.
Perfect.
So that you can put it in below the video and people can go and download that. And what we tell people is just open it up and pick a word and use it. Use it all day long. Try to find 2 or 3 or 4 different times when you could use that word, or notice when other people are using that word. It doesn't take much to create a neural pathway in the brain to that word and make it a part of your emotional, giving you access to it in other conversations. And so it is a great resource. And like you say, there's some words there. It's a dictionary, so we can provide the definition, but then trying to find it turns into a real game, trying to find a way that you can use that word in your everyday life, or helping your kids develop that word, or challenging your team to use that word. But it becomes like a 5-day challenge or a daily challenge. Here's the word of the day. share with us how you used it, how you found yourself using it.
Absolutely. I love all of this. Brenda, you and I could talk for hours about emotional intelligence and communication and how to interact and communicate with the world. But so I know that you, with the gamification, is that something that people have to be certified to do on their own? Is that something that they can do without guidance and training initially? Like how do people get involved with working with your products on their own?
They can just buy the decks, and the decks come with instruction cards. If they're part of our community, we're just launching a membership. The first level is going to be really cheap, but they can have access to the digital cards so that they can get a feel for what's happening. I think within that membership, we're starting out with one gameplay a week, but as the community grows and we're bringing in from other countries, and we got to be sensitive to time zones. So there'll be, 2 or 3 different times that we just come on to a Zoom call and play games. And we use the digital decks, and you get an experience of what the heck are these games? Because it's such a unique tool that I don't know anybody. And we had a group from China reach out and invite us over. They paid our way over to China to present at an organization development conference.
Mm-hmm.
And they got back to us and said, who are your competitors? Like, we can't find, like, we've looked far and wide and we can't find anybody that does that. And although people are competing for the same dollars as us, there is nobody that's training in the exact same way that we are, like using the cards the way that we do. We've got over 30 decks of cards that work with everybody from 2-year-olds up to 102-year-olds and into professional athletics, youth athletics, corporate. We've got a thing on diversity and inclusion, a whole 7-series deck called Race to Empathy. So there's something for everybody in there.
Yeah.
Within the membership, they'll have access to the digital card decks, to the gameplay, to some other, emotional intelligence tidbits, emotion of the week, different things like that. So we're hoping that'll be launched by July or August. And
awesome. But I'm assuming they can go to your website, sign up for your newsletter, and they'll get information as that's made available?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. And I can honestly say, you're in Calgary. I am currently in Florida. And that 6-week course, we had people, I believe, from New York, I think other parts of Canada. I don't know where else.
All over. We even had people from the UK in one of our courses. And I think there's somebody from Australia in one of the earlier courses. So, and these people are getting up in the middle of the night to do the course. So.
And they're getting the same benefit from the virtual deck. So that's what I think is really cool, is the fact that, we were doing this on Zoom. We were obviously creating community and having this gameplay in an interactive setting, in a virtual setting. So, which means it's great for companies that span the globe. So it's not, you don't have to be in the same city, in the same room, sitting in the same conference room to really benefit from the gameplay.
No, absolutely. And on the UEQ website, which is u-eq.com, under the programs, I think there's a page for conversational EQ, which is the 6-week course.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Jen. I don't know if you were on there with Jen, but we have a really powerful testimonial from one of our participants that's just coming out of it. And I'm going to get yours up there too.
Perfect.
But there you can kind of see what Jen was so natural. Like I said, man, I couldn't have even scripted it that well. She was just like, you got to pop on there and see it. But she just benefited so much that just in life in general, that she's now moving on to our 12-week. But just to understand what people are getting out of it is.
Yeah. It's really impactful. And again, as somebody who went through the course and experienced it firsthand, and it's one of those things that when you become aware of it within yourself, you're suddenly aware of, you're like, well, that person could use emotional intelligence training. That person, that person, I could use more of it. That person could use it. Like, that person's pretty good, but they could use more of it. So again, it's one of those things that everybody can benefit from.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to invest in it, because it really just makes you a more well-rounded human. Which means you're going to be better in all of your relationships, all of your interactions, everything you really apply yourself to.
And, you said at the early part of this, you said that we really are, I don't know what your language was, but we're social beings. Mm-hmm. We're not meant to be isolated on our own. We're meant to come together as community. And there's no better way to build connections and build community than through conversation. And having the skills to do that powerfully is one of the best investments that you can make in your life.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Brenda, those are all my questions for today. Anything else, any final thoughts that you want to leave us with as far as UEQ, emotional intelligence, communication, anything?
I think what I would say is that almost everybody, and you included, almost everybody that came through our 6-week course came into it thinking it was kind of silly and they weren't going to get much out of it, but they'd give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody coming out of it went, holy cow, like I had no idea. So I just say to people, don't give it a try. It's not expensive. Give it a try. Check it out. See if it makes a difference for you. We can guarantee that it's going to make a difference in some realm of your life. If you actually sit there and listen and play some of the games, you will, and it doesn't take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a business development guy from KPMG that did just a 2-hour workshop with us. And he called me up and said, what the hell did you do to me? Like I played your games for 15 minutes and my whole life changed. I talked to my wife different. I talked to my kids different. I talked to people at work different. So don't discount the profound impact this can have because of the simplicity of the tool.
Yeah. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best answer, right?
It is. Yeah. It's not, we come equipped. We come equipped with this. We're meant to have these skills. We've just never focused on developing them.
Exactly. It's like having a hammer in your tool bag and you've just never been taught how to swing a hammer. So you're just teaching people how to use the tools that they have inherently within themselves.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of this. So
awesome. Brenda, thank you so much for your time today. And I cannot wait to see you in the UEQ community.
I look forward to it.
Thanks.